I had been thinking a lot about what was missing to me in the horror genre and what was missing to me in movies in general. And I have a great reverence for the craft of cinema. So I wanted to make something that really, highlighted and focused on like cinema as part of the story. And so I had an idea about people making a movie because I wanted to invite the audience in to be sort of charmed by the clumsiness of what making a movie is actually like. And in many ways, give them a crash course on how movies are made and what goes into that, so that when watching the movie as a whole, they would maybe appreciate some of the more esoteric things that the different people who work on the movies are doing, whether it be me, whether it be the actors, whether it be the composer, the costume designer, et cetera, et cetera. So in figuring out that, I had this idea for a movie because, porn movies and horror movies have always had this kind of odd symbiotic relationship where they're both outsider movies and they were able to be made outside of Hollywood and still be part of their own industry because they had exploitable elements that could be sold. When you come up making low budget horror movies, you're only seen as like one step above porn. So I felt it was an interesting way to put those two things together. And I'd always want to make a movie set in the 70s because I think it's the most revered time for American cinema. And I think it's a time when, movies were subversive and movies were experimental and they were sort of filmmaker driven and yet widely accepted. And also the 70s was the time that VHS was really starting to take off, and VHS is what made adult movies and made horror movies have an industry unto themselves. And that's what Wayne, the character, was trying to do. So all this kind of swirled together in a way that I also felt like horror movies had gotten soft and it was time for someone to make a slasher movie that, felt like this sort of slightly like your parents warned you about a little bit movie. And so all that came together and here we are. Well, the story just kind of stems from somewhat of a slasher archetype of people go to a place and then, terror is revealed or whatnot. So I wanted to keep the archetypes familiar because I wanted people to think they knew what the movie they were getting was. And I wanted to sort of place them in an environment where they're like, oh, I know what this is, and then surprise them by subverting their expectations. And I also, from a character standpoint, I just wanted to make very relatable characters who were maybe like not quite the archetypes of horror movies. They were similar to them, but then they behave differently. I think in all my movies, the characters in the movies are kind of people who don't belong in a horror movie, but end up in one. I've just been interested in that. So I think this is no different. And I wanted people to kind of be charmed by and like these people who are making a movie and therefore like the spirit that they're doing. And I'm intrigued by anyone who's like has ambitions, no matter what that ambition is for. People that are like going for things that are very difficult. I generally root people on for that because it's hard to do certain things. And anytime someone's taking a risk, I think that's compelling. So that's where that came from as far as the characters and making a movie. It's just like, maybe it's the kind of movie you wouldn't necessarily approve of across the board in all different types of people, but this is the movie that they're making and we just got to root for them either way. I think that stylistically, like the aesthetic of the movie was mostly inspired by just sort of like the Americana that was in a lot of 70s and maybe 60s era filmmaking. And so there wasn't anything specific. I mean, we probably had like a mood board of images from movies that help with like location references and set design and things like that. But for the most part, it was a vibe that just anything from certainly Texas Chainsaw all the way to Smokey and the Bandit, like anything in that sort of like Americana, independent American film of the sort of 70s era. It just needed to feel like it was amongst those.